So good afternoon, Paul.
Good afternoon.
So today's April 26th, Sunday, 26th of April, and you've kindly agreed to do another little session of answering some people's questions. So the first question is pertaining to fear. Now, the whole situation with the coronavirus and COVID-19 is exposing quite starkly how insecure and uncertain life actually is. And this is bringing up a lot of fear, which we are mostly not accustomed to, experiencing this amount of fear so fundamental to life. How to deal with that, Paul?
Well, this is a question that I get all the time because people are frightened, and it's justified fear. Fear is, as I've said many times before, the kind of primal emotion. As long as you're identified with sankharas, with conditions, you're identified with your body and your feelings and your thoughts and memories, then that identity is a kind of grasping of things that change, that you can't stop changing. You can't, even when they reach their peak, the peak of good health and good fortune, you can't sustain it. There's always, it's going to change because that's its very nature. So the coronavirus is like a teacher at this time for us. It's exposing the danger of the samsara, or the world that we cling to, because it is a kind of menacing fear, because we have to keep social distances, and you're afraid to touch anything, or a doorknob or an elevator button. Can't shake hands anymore. I can't hug your mother or father. What are you going to, there's putting restrictions on normal kind of behavior that make us feel safe and secure as personalities, as egos, as separate entities. And so this puts this kind of quarantine period of our lives, and it's worldwide, so it's not just Thailand or Britain or the United States. There's no country you can go to where you can escape it. It's good to look at it as a messenger, a warning of the way things actually are. That what people constantly refrain now to wanting things to go back to normal, and that's when they had all their habit patterns unchallenged, where they had their social habits, social friends. They could go out into the streets, dance and sing, go to clubs and enjoy life, or go to work, have a security of having a regular wage, support the family. There's so much security in what we perceive now from this time as normal, and where this that we consider is abnormal. But in terms of Dhamma, it's the dangers were always there. There's always been a possible pandemic or epidemic of some disease. And I remember when I was young, back in the 1950s, there was this idea that by this time in 2020, they would have cured cancer, found a kind of vaccine or some kind of medicine that would permanently get rid of cancer and all other forms of disease. And, and you look at what's happening now, there's more dangerous diseases that have arisen. Besides cancer itself is still a problem for everyone, because sickness, disease is something nobody wants. We want health, we want a painless life built on security, safety, love and kindness, justice and fairness. And that's the ideal realm that we create with our thoughts. But the Buddha warned us back in 2,564 years ago, that life is itself, it's a dangerous situation. Just recognize the vulnerability of your own physical body. It's not like an elephant or a rhinoceros with a tough hide, but it's easily damaged, bruised, slashed, knife, bullets can penetrate it, lightning can strike it. It gets, and then you grow up, get old, get sick, and die. These are the natural conditions of phenomena teaching us this is the way it is. So at this time, to deal with fear, don't take it personally. Don't see it as something wrong with you or wrong with the world, or blaming everything on some other, seeking China to blame or Donald Trump to blame or things like this. Just observe the tendency to want to blame misery, unhappiness, fear on some external cause, rather than looking inward and observing. Fear is like this. It's an emotion that's common to all of us. It's the very nature of sankhara. There's a lot to be frightened of. And then the Buddhist teaching of mindfulness, this is the essence, the very heart of the Buddhist teaching, is to be aware of the way things are. He's not telling us how things should be as an ideal, because an ideal is beautiful. It's ideal, it's the best you can possibly think or imagine, but it is a sankhara, and then what is ideal is imagined, it's imagination which changes, and as much as you can imagine a kind of utopian society where everything you live forever and in good health and youth and everyone is beautiful, fair and just, that's imagination. Imagination is like this. It changes to fear and dread and fear of pain, fear of loss, fear of dying. Is a result. We also imagine that. What is death? We imagine in the future we're going to die. We don't like to be reminded we're going to die. We like the idea of living a long life. At least when you're young. When you're old, you're not so frightened of dying. At least speaking for myself. But so yeah, when you're young, you have a zest for life and interest in experience. And when you're old, you don't have that same zest. You've experienced enough to know that just having more experiences is not the answer to peace, to happiness, to real peace and happiness. And where does peace and happiness lie? At this very moment, is our life just an experience of old age, sickness, death, loss of loved ones, fear and desire and all the rest? That's how sometimes Buddha Dhamma is interpreted. But he pointed to nibbana, happiness. And what is truly free at this moment is awareness. Awareness is not personal, is not physical, is not, frightened or angry or greedy or selfish. And this is available to us here and now. It's what mindfulness is the path to the deathless, is the gate to the deathless, to what we really long for and hope for and desire is already available here and now when we begin to trust in our awareness rather than just try to get rid of fear or get lost in it or take medicines or drugs to to diminish it or then suppress it for a while, but see it as something to learn from at this time. It's an important teacher for everyone, all people on this planet, but very few can see it in terms of something that they can use. They see it as something we just want to get rid of as quickly as possible and go back to normal, whatever that is.
So when fear comes up, sometimes it can be just a niggling fear, and sometimes it feels like terror, really, when the experience actually arises.
Yeah, I mean, it has different levels of intensity, but still, you're aware of it, whether it's absolute terror or just a niggling kind of unpleasantness and feeling of insecurity. That which is aware of it is not niggling or insecure or terrifying. The emotion can change from niggling fear and just general anxiety to terror, but awareness never gets intimidated by it, and so that's why it's so important to trust this awareness. Look at fear, observe it. This is awareness observing the way things are, not you as a person confronting fear to get rid of it. And that doesn't work. Me as Ajahn Sumedho confronting my fears and fighting them and killing them all off one by one as they arise. That's not the way it happens. It's learning to. It's like this. In anyone's life, fear is going to arise. Even one who's been meditating for years. And the future is the very nature. Ask yourself right now, what is the future? And at this very moment. And it's you imagine it. Imagine like tomorrow. Right now, tomorrow is an image you create in the present moment. And you're aware that you change from getting caught in your imagination for tomorrow and becoming someone that is planning to do this, do that, or confront something or deal with something or dread something tomorrow, to being the awareness of the images that are present. And the images arise and cease. But what doesn't arise and cease is the awareness. It's the constant, the spiritual center of existence that is available to all of us, all human beings at this moment. So I suggest, like welcoming fear. Try that, just instead of saying, how do I get rid of it, or I can't stand this, I can't bear this, or, whose fault is it that's making me frightened? Be aware of that. It's like this. Like you're suddenly taking the stance of wisdom, of Dhamma, of reality, standing in reality rather than in corporality or in vulnerability and fear. When you take your stand in fear, then you become more frightened. It's endless. It just goes on from one thing to the next. Or you try to sleep it off, or take alcohol, or think, you need psychotherapy, or, you can imagine all kinds of ways of trying to get rid of fear when you see it as some kind of personal possession, but it's not. It arises and ceases. And as I've said before, there's a lot to be frightened of when you're attached to mortality as your identity. When you identify with the physical body completely and never question it, then your life is going to be, there's a fear of death, of sickness, of loss, of old age. These are all things to dread in terms of physical experiences. But when you take your stand in awareness, being this awareness itself, then we learn from the way things are, rather than seeing my fear, seen in terms of ownership and personal identity. Fear is just like this. It's present. When it's present, it's like this. When it's absent, it's like this. And this awareness is what you really are. That this is something that we can realize is a state of peacefulness and happiness. It's natural. It's here and now too. It's not about if I meditate so many hours a day and in the future I will attain Nibbana and become peaceful and happy. That's still an idea that you're somebody who has to do something to get something you don't have now. But when it's available here and now, then there's no future necessary. It's just learning to trust and open and stop resisting and receive life as it happens.
Another question concerns the fact that people, especially in cities who live in apartments, are not used to being cooped up for weeks or months on end. And many people feel like they're going crazy being locked up like that for so long. How to deal with that?
The same applies to that, like what we consider, like when you're living in a city, in an apartment, it could be a condominium, a luxury condominium, or a slum. When you're cooped up, and you're even afraid to go out and pass somebody in the corridor outside your apartment, when you can't even go to a park to take a walk, or even going to the supermarket is kind of stepping into dangerous ground. This is a real challenge to a life that has been developed living in an apartment in a big city where your contact with nature is minimal. You can look up at the skies and there's a few trees by the streets or lawns or gardens, but when even these you can't go out and enjoy. It's like this, this sense of being incarcerated, in jail, in prison, when you can't get what you want immediately, do what you're used to doing, to live your life so that you don't feel fear. In the old days, people had a lot more, before big cities, and they had to deal with bears and tigers, elephants, poisonous snakes, things like this, and unknown factors, in nature. And they had to prepare, like in Northern Europe, prepare for a winter of being incarcerated because you're snowbound and you can't go anywhere, you can't go to work. And what did they do? What did people do, say, 100 years ago in Norway? You developed hobbies and ways of preserving food and knitting, embroidering, crocheting, carpentry, ways of putting in time, and making things that you need, and making food available through a period where there's no security in getting food from outside in the forests or jungles around you. But nowadays, modern people, sophisticated city folk, aren't used to doing things like that. They're used to the freedom of going to the pub, of going to the theater, to the concert, to the parks, to go and dance and sing and go to gyms and work out, and these are all suddenly they're forbidden to us, and we have to live within the four walls of our apartment in the middle of a crowded city. Then it frustrates all our what we're used to doing, our sense of freedom. There are all these protesters about my rights. You're infringing on my rights by limiting, by these quarantines, by these restrictions. And so, they feel offended or angry, at the government or the politicians or the people that prevent them from doing what they're used to doing, living like they used to live. But this is a matter, literally a matter of life and death and safety and so forth. So some people tend to appreciate the lockdown in many ways, even though they find it difficult because it frustrates. It's frustrating. It's frustrating to change your lifestyle, to be compelled to live in a way you don't want or don't like, is like this. So, in situations like that, the same apply. Mindfulness is the way to deal with it. Being locked into a room in a big city is like this. When all your emotions want to go out on the street, go to the bar, go to the gym, go to the rock concert, go to the football game. But these are emotions that arise while you're locked in your flat. And you imagine a football game would, that would be exciting. Usually football is a pretty exciting thing to watch. But in your flat, you can watch it on television, but you don't get the same thrill that you do, especially if you're all alone. And you feel forced and deprived of the freedom to go to the football stadium and watch it with the crowd. It's like this. So just the way you are, like I'm not telling you how you should be or how you should think, but encouraging you to use what is available here and now, whether you're locked down in a flat in New York City or London or Bangkok, or you're like I'm locked down in a monastery in Thailand in the forest. So at least I have around me kind of natural phenomena, which is you really appreciate. Trees suddenly become your friends, and you see you don't take them for granted anymore because the trees are very beautiful. The trees around my kuti at Wat Bharatanawan are, suddenly take on a beauty I've never quite noticed before. Till you're forced to live within a limited space for an unlimited length of time. But this does not prevent peace and happiness to be our refuge rather than frustration, anger, resentment, blame. Notice how easy it is to blame somebody. And I noticed it in myself years ago. When somebody did something, who's to blame was the first thing that would come into my mind. Somebody spilled coffee on the carpet in Amaravati Sala. Who's to blame? And then I noticed, why is that my first reaction? Wanting to blame somebody, give me their name, the desire to punish them or scold them or make them feel bad for having done something. And just by being aware of that, I ask myself, why do I always think that the first thing when something unpleasant happens? Who's to blame? Either somebody else or it's me. We can blame ourselves. We can blame, the weather, blame another monk, a nun, blame a politician, blame president of the United States. We can blame, there's always, and observe that in yourself, the tendency to whose fault is this? Who's to blame? Is it the Chinese? Is it the Russians? We don't know who's to blame, and it's like this. We don't need to know who's to blame, but we can know the way it is. When we feel this sense of wanting to blame or reaction to blame, we can be aware of it. It's like this. It's an unpleasant emotion to live with, this desire to blame somebody else, something else, for our feeling of anger or fear at this moment. But awareness doesn't blame anybody. It's aware of this habit. It's just an unpleasant habit that we've developed, through conditioning. It's not personal even. So you begin to change your attitude towards towards what you're feeling, towards the habits you have, the conditioned reactions you have to life, because you're resting in the unconditioned awareness that you can trust. And its very nature is peace and happiness.
There's another question is, many people experience the loss of loved ones. The number of people dying is quite important. So a lot of people are experiencing this, the loss of elderly relatives or sometimes not so old. And there's a lot of pain that comes from that.
Yes, well, this is our humanity, because we form attachments to people, to relatives, to friends, to husband, to wife, to children, to pets. We become dependent on them, emotionally dependent. And when the object of our love and attachment and dependence passes away, dies, this is what you feel. It's exposing that kind of dependence, need, and identity with something or somebody that you feel is separate from you. And so grief and sorrow are human emotions that we all experience. Loss of the loved. I remember when I first ordained, one of the monastic reflections we used to do in the evening chanting at Wat is that all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. And so I learned this and we started reflecting on it. That's really depressing. At first I thought, just to think right now, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. So on the ego level, I found that depressing because the ego doesn't like that. We like the reflection of all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will be beloved and pleasing and mine forevermore. That's the way we can fool ourselves. But that's not the way things are, isn't it? Every one of us has to witness the aging process of our parents, and that, the ones that brought us into this world, our mothers, our fathers, as they get old, get sick and die. And grief is, when they die, then we feel grief. But grief is a sense of personal loss How can I live without my loved one? The loss of my loved one has ruined my life. Who's to blame? We go on into that. Or we blame ourselves. One of the problems with grief is we tend to start feeling we should have been more loving, more grateful, more attentive, we should have visited more often. And just observe these tendencies, these habit tendencies to feel guilt about when somebody, like especially parents, elderly parents, pass away. It's like this. And this constant refrain of "it's like this" isn't just a kind of dismissing it. It's not kind of just "it's like this, it doesn't matter." It's not a kind of heartless passing on of feeling, but it's like this. Feeling grief is like this. This sense of loss of a loved one is like this. And it's not like you're just trying to deny it or just get rid of it. But observe that grief it feels like this. And that which is aware of grief isn't grieving. Grief is a condition that arises and ceases according to other conditions. So the other night, one of the monks was telling me about a friend whose dog passed away recently, and she was very attached to this dog, and she was feeling this grief and sorrow over the loss of a dog. We can feel, many of us have felt incredible grief over loss of a dog or a cat or a pet that we loved and lived with for a number of years. And when they die, then this is what we feel. So taking the position of Buddha, of awareness, we observe. We don't get lost in grief. We don't hang on to it or try to suppress it, but use it, reflect on it. And you'll see it'll rise and cease, it'll come and go. Eventually, it goes away. But for the first few months or a year, usually it brings back this then, just the memory of departed loved one will bring back this sense of grief. But each time it happens, take the position of Buddha, of knowing it's like this, and receive it, welcome it, so that you're learning from grief. Because it is a condition, it's teaching you about the nature of conditions, about phenomena. And all phenomena is impermanent. So it's not that you find no permanent phenomena ever. I've made a point of my life trying to find a permanent phenomenon and haven't found any. But what is permanent, what is deathless, is here and now is awareness, consciousness. Trust that.
And then finally, one more question for today is like in the wake of loss, like you were mentioning earlier, in the wake of fear, sometimes anger comes up. And sometimes people follow the anger, sometimes people are afraid of the anger. They feel the anger coming up and they feel guilty, like they shouldn't be feeling it. How to allow that to happen as well.
Yeah, anger is another primal emotion. And none of us want to, very few of us really want to be angry. One of the most common questions in retreats that I've given over the years is what do I do with anger? How do I get rid of anger? So there's a sense of personal identity with anger. It's like fear. You identify with it. That means you're attached to it. The sense of yourself as a separate ego, a separate entity, is based on the fact that anger is some kind of personal flaw, something wrong with you, rather than it is an emotion that is part of our human experience. All mammalian creatures feel anger because it's a kind of primal emotion, kind of a survival mechanism, basically. And so, just like sexual desire is a, procreation of species, that's the nature of the body. Male, female bodies are about procreating the human species. And anger is a part of this self-preservation or preservation of the species, and it can also be a sense of, personal identity. But getting back to the awareness, being aware of anger, awareness never gets angry. So you're discerning the difference between anger, the feeling that you're having right now, to being aware of it. And if you attach to it, you become an angry person. That's attachment, that's heedlessness, that's not mindfulness. Heedlessness or habitual. Your habits are to grasp it or to resist it, trying to get rid of it, or to blame it on somebody. It's you, that person over there that makes me angry. That we tend to seek objects to blame for our anger, or we blame ourselves. And in the experience of loss or grief, we can get angry with ourselves, angry with God, angry with life, because, it's deprived us of a loved one or something that we cherish and value, and it's not fair, it's not right, shouldn't be like that. So those are all this thinking habit that we're very much identified with is very, this is the strongest identity we have. We believe in our thoughts and our feelings through attachment, through habitual attachment, conditioned attachment. It's like from birth we become conditioned by our parents, by our society, by our culture, by our religion to think and react like this or that in certain ways according to conventions, according to cultural conditioning. But awareness is not culturally conditioned. It's what if you want to know what normality is, it's completely normal. It's the deathless. It isn't about, there's not a sankhara, not a phenomenon that will come and go. But ignorant people that don't know this reality, then there's so much to resent in life. When I was young, you had this idea that life should be fair and just. People should be responsible for their actions and what they say. And you feel that normal society should be fair. There should be fairness and justice for all. And then as you get older, you realize that's not the way things are. Sometimes life is fair, sometimes it's just, sometimes it's totally unfair. So that the personality, the sense of self-worth, of safety, of security is based on the ideal of fairness and justice. So the ego depends when it's being challenged, when you've been treated unfairly, unjustly, when you've been blamed for something you haven't done, when you've been taken advantage of or humiliated made fun of, we see this as unfair and it shouldn't be. And, you're right, it shouldn't be. It's unfair. So you're not saying that there's nothing wrong with it, but it is what it is in the present. And that we can always respond to with awareness and wisdom. We can see for ourselves that, feeling humiliated, personally humiliated or misunderstood is like this. And you kind of rest in that awareness. It's like this is not dismissing it, denying it, or saying anything about what you should do about it, but it's suddenly this feeling of being embarrassed or humiliated or treated unfairly is like this. You come to peace with it. It arises and ceases. You're not making it into suffering that you would if you grasp it and resent it and create more thoughts, more emotions, and get indignant and want to sue the person or fight them or kill them or whatever extreme reaction you might feel towards being treated unfairly. None of that, that's all caught in the grasping of the emotion, where awareness isn't grasping, it's letting go of the emotion and observing it. Emotions linger, they don't suddenly disappear in an instant like we'd like them to. But when you let them go, you accept the kind of unpleasant physical, emotional feelings that still exist, still operate. But if you are patient and accepting and receptive to them, they cease too. And when you let things cease, what's left with cessation is peace, peacefulness. So in life, the sage, the wise being, the enlightened being is one who one who's treated fairly and justly and worshipped and appreciated like they should be. But even the best of us have to deal with the way we're conditioned. I used to feel, why do I have to react like this? I used to be very self-critical. And so, I would turn inward and blame myself. Why do I have to get so upset over somebody's blaming me for something? And why do I even want to seek revenge? One case in my life where I felt I was treated abominably, I wanted to seek revenge. But being a monk, I can watch that, the desire to get even, set them right, humiliate them, get even, is another emotion we create, which is very unpleasant, totally unpeaceful, and something that we should never follow with action and speech. But it lingers, and then it's gone. And when you have that kind of patient endurance with the here and now, then you begin to recognize behind all the fuss, the bother, the noise, the confusion of samsara, of worldly life, of personal habits, is this unconditional peacefulness, consciousness itself. That is what, our true nature, which is present here and now, not something that you get if you're a good boy and good girl and through years of hard work and practice. It's something that we've forgotten or lost track of through this kind of blind attachment to phenomena as we, because life is the experience of arising, ceasing of phenomena. And it's continuous. You see, even though my vision is not very good, I still can see enough to see the presence and absence of through seeing, or my hearing's not so good, so I can do with So even hard of hearing and wonky vision is still a good practice, and if I resent it, then I'm making a problem. I'm going to suffer because vision isn't what I was when I was 20 years old. I used to have excellent vision, 20/20 vision. Never had to wear glasses till I was 40. I think those were the good old days. What is that? Reminiscing about a period that is only a memory here and now, which is another phenomenon. A memory of when I was 20 years old is a phenomenon in the present. It arises and ceases. And what is it that's aware? It's not a person. It's conscious, the deathless reality of here and now.
Thank you, Paul.